Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. I've recently had a rash of new connections brought together by dear friends, collaborators, and listeners of the podcast. I truly love how our connections with each other keep building the momentum of the new masculine. One of those new connections is my next guest, Jacob Clancy. Jacob identifies as an entrepreneur, as a father, and as a lover. He is in a deep phase of transition, or as he refers to it, a reinvention of sorts, exploring what's next after retiring early from a law firm he founded in 1993 and currently navigating a divorce. Tying together his love of making others laugh with his passion for helping others live their best lives, Jacob's new journey is as a comedy entrepreneur. What is that? Well, he's still figuring that out too. And that's exactly why I'm excited to chat with him. I see us men, myself included, rarely very comfortable in the exploration phase that transitions bring into our lives. It makes sense that we feel safer in the known, but I'm curious to explore the gifts that exist in the unknown. So let's welcome him into the new masculine and learn from his story of reinvention. Thanks for joining me, Jacob.
Thanks for having me, Travis.
Is there anything that I didn't mention in that intro that feels important for people to know about you?
I would like to punctuate the transition of, going through a divorce at the same time as ending, my 30-year career in the law has been a challenge. But just today, he and I have crossed a hurdle that is such a validation for how both of us have behaved in the marriage before it fell apart, and just is such a wonderful feeling today to be able to have this podcast on the day that we have resolved issues that could have taken a left turn and been, a fight and long and drawn out, but instead it's civil, it's respectful, it's generous, it's love. And I'm just thrilled that it's on that day that I get to talk with you. And as our audience wouldn't know, but we tried to do this 2 other times, and minutes before going on, something happened on my side where I needed to cancel. And now I know why.
Oh, I love knowing the synchronicities of life and how things work out for a reason. And what a beautiful celebration of things going well, and that we get to have a conversation from that perspective, maybe rather than maybe what you were feeling a little bit before today.
Right.
I'd love to hear more about you as a man and find out more about your journey. So when you think about growing up from being a boy in our country, in our culture, turning into a man, the journey that you've been on, tell me what stories come to mind as like pivotal moments in your development as a person.
Well, I think it's important to know that I was adopted at birth and was always aware of that from my parents, who were wonderful parents. They unfortunately divorced when I was quite young. I was just 16, 17 months old. So my early years were spent living with my mom, visiting my dad every other weekend. And I remember feeling nervous being around him, and because he wasn't in my everyday life. I really never even had that. But then at the age of 7, circumstances changed, and I lived with my father and his new wife, affectionately referred to as the step monster. And that was my experience, of a man for the first time. On the one hand, was this father of mine who was so loving to me and supportive and had built a dental practice out of nothing, and had become this very successful dentist in our small town. And when I would go to the office and assist him on the weekends or just check in on him during the day, he was this man in charge. He was beloved by his staff. He was beloved by his patients. But then there was a whole different man who came home at night to deal with his wife. They had a horrible marriage. I was closer to her age at the age of 7 than he was. So she was much younger. She had no business trying to raise a stepchild. And I've seen in, retrospect, she was in an awful situation, and I give her a lot of grace now. I didn't at the time. But dad was just a hollow version of himself at home. He would allow things to go on that were, absolutely ridiculous. And I just couldn't understand why this woman had so much power. So I kind of grew up with, well, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I learned how to be 3 steps ahead and make sure that I didn't incur her wrath. And I decided to provide for my own needs. I wasn't going to have to ask her for something and be turned down. I just went out and created jobs. I mowed lawns. I sold apples. I had a bike route for little old ladies in my town and did stuff for them and did errands. And so I got money and I would buy the things I needed. I never had to ask her. Well, that grain of adversity helped me when I became an entrepreneur myself and built the law firm, out of nothing. So, I didn't like going through that phase with my stepmother or having to see my dad as basically 2 different people, but it had a huge impact on my life. And hopefully in the end, it's been mostly positive.
Mm. Yeah, I love that ability that you have to track the purpose of the adversity you experience. I think that so often it can be really hard to get stuck in the challenge of the adversity, and to stay there for a really long time and to
Yeah.
feel so hurt by that it's hard to move forward or hard to move towards forgiveness or hard to see, as you said, your step monster from a different perspective and see her upbringing and her situation that caused her to potentially be who she was. I love that ability within you, though, to find the purpose behind it as you've taken steps through
Yeah.
it.
And, I wish I knew how that happened to me. I mean, so many other people choose to be a victim
Uh-huh.
and they wallow in the pain that is legitimate. And I understand, but if you stay there, nothing happens. You
Mm.
just wither. And
Hmm.
I've seen too many people do that. I don't know why I had the ability to rise above it and, keep trying,
Mm.
you know.
I can already see themes that are playing out in your current life that you developed as a child, that sort of you've been navigating transitions throughout your childhood, the sort of separation of the family of origin, living with your mom first, then living with your dad next. And then, so there's that ability to navigate changes and transitions in life and to be in a completely new scenario and need to figure it out. And then
Yeah,
that sort of entrepreneurial spirit that's like, oh, I'm going to be ahead of this. I'm going to provide for my own needs. I'm going to make sure that I uh, have something that takes care of me rather than needing to rely on what feels inconsistent or maybe unavailable to me.
right,
It's
right.
interesting how you were already developing those things as a kid.
Yeah, by, sheer necessity,
Uh-huh.
you know. I didn't see any other choice but to do that. And
Mm.
then finally, I was end of my 8th grade year and I saw myself becoming like the stepmother. You know,
Mm.
my uh I was my humor became biting and hurtful and I became judgmental. I felt like the way she was. And I finally had to leave the life of being a doctor's son. We had the big house, we had the pool, but I was terribly unhappy and I was becoming somebody I didn't want to become. So I escape, that situation and spend my high school years back with my mother. And so this mantle of stress that had been on me for 7 years is removed. And what's so fascinating to me that less than a month in my new context, that's when I first became confronted with the fact, oh no, I'm gay.
Oh
And
gosh.
now I've got to fight that.
Uh-huh.
I get out from under the stepmother, and now I've got this other challenge. You know, and of course, at the time, I thought it was a challenge. I didn't know it was something to be accepted and embraced. My family never was rejecting about it. It was something internal. Church had been important to me during those 7 years with my dad and stepmother, and they never said anything negative, but I just knew they wouldn't approve. And
Hmm.
so I started the journey of trying to change and ended up getting married, and I have a son. And how do you get out of that and still honor, you know, the people that it wasn't their fault that I was gay and I got married and had a child? How do you manage that? And it wasn't easy, but
Hmm.
that was another major transition, to have to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, it makes kind of sense that prior to living back with your mom, sort of there was more other things that were a necessity. Your other needs needed to be tended to, like some of the more basic foundational needs, and rather than the identity exploration part of things and who am I
Right.
really? And the second that you get to take that stress off and you feel a little safer, of course, that's going to bubble to the surface. I feel like that
Yeah.
happens so often for many of us. The second we feel safe, the shit starts to rise up.
Yeah. Couldn't I had 6 months of peace, please?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Couldn't I just have a little bit of a break?
Please. Yeah.
So, reflecting back on that part of your journey and that part of your life where you were reconciling your own identity as a gay man in this world and getting married and having a child, like tell me about what your manhood or what you were like back in during those times.
Well, when I was growing up, I can remember the spot on the highway where my dad told me, if you get a business degree and a law degree, there's nothing you can't accomplish.
Mm,
So now I find myself married with a son, working really hard as an event coordinator at a multi-purpose facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But what am I going to do? And it occurred to me that I needed to go to law school. Now, I wasn't conscious of it at the time, but I knew I needed to do something so that I could take care of my responsibilities and then at the same time give myself a shot at having my life.
mm,
Okay. So law school was my mistress. I poured all of my energy and thought into that. I had always been a decent student, but I turned out to be a really great law student. I was number 11 out of 200. Of course, my colleague was number 9, and I always regretted that he was two steps ahead of me. But the point is, I excelled in that environment and was fortunate enough to have several clerkships, that people, pine to get. I clerked for a federal judge. I worked for a big law firm in Springfield, Missouri. I was of counsel for an oil company in Tulsa. And guess what, Travis? I hated all 3 jobs.
mm-hmm,
So I went back to my roots where my grandmother, after her husband, my grandfather died in 1927, she didn't become a ward of her family and go back to Texas. She moved to Carthage, Missouri and started the Carthage Credit Bureau and ruled that town for 40 years on who got credit and who didn't. My dad took that example. After he fought in World War II, he went to college on the GI Bill, went to dental school, and built his practice out of nothing. So that's all I knew. So as I'm approaching the end of law school, I realized what's best for me is to take the biggest gamble and say no to all the safe jobs and move the family to Branson, Missouri, of all places, to start my law firm. I had been fortunate to learn a particular area of tax law that the author of the textbook took me under his wing and gave me the confidence and the practicalities to start my own firm back in 1993. And so it was the need to afford my freedom that drove me to law school and then to build this business. And, I didn't know what I was doing, but I just said yes to every opportunity. And you just never know what relationship or what circumstance is going to come around the corner and everything changes.
mm,
For me, it was a lady that I had met in my undergrad who was in Branson and she was moving away to Florida. And she just happened to say, there's this estate planning group called the National Network of Estate Planning Attorneys that I think you would really enjoy. Well, that group enabled me to get world-class documents and forms and practice rules on how to be an estate planning attorney without having, to be in a big firm. They were supporting the little guy in being able to build an estate planning law firm. Had I not met Linda, was her name, who knows how long it would have taken me, to find that. So is it luck, or was it just preparation meets opportunity, as they say? I don't know, but that's how it started. And about 5 years into the practice, I had reached the point, Travis, where I could no longer fight it. I had spent 8 years in the Exodus movement doing my best to try to change. And, I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed that I had legitimate needs that deserved to be met, but sex with men was not the way to get those needs met. And, I would go to these national conferences and get as close to the fire without getting burned. I was never part of some of these groups where you lived in a situation for 9 months and, some really bad damage was done to a lot of men in that circumstance. I was kind of on the periphery, but I was, trying to change. And ultimately in 1998, when I was at my fourth conference, they had moved it from a college dormitory style conference where it seemed more serious that way. Now we were at the DoubleTree in Seattle. So it felt like vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And a gentleman that I had met and befriended at the first conference, he and I shared a room, and he was going through something really difficult in his own management of his gay issues and whatnot. He happened to be a leader of one of the local groups in a city here in the United States. So it was particularly hard for him that he had fallen in love with this guy and he didn't know what to do, and he's married and 4 kids, and he's pouring all of this out, and it's emotional for him. And at the end of his sharing, he's in tears, and he asked me, could I share the bed with you? And that's when I'm like, wait a minute. I am not going to be 45 years old trying to hook up with 33-year-old men at Exodus conferences because I can't face the truth that I'm gay. And within 2 months, I had made the decision to leave the marriage. And I felt terrible. I felt guilty. It was hard. I really couldn't own everything with my soon-to-be former spouse. I mealy mouthed around it, but it was a counselor that she had chosen that told me, you have thoughtfully considered this issue from every perspective possible. And in the end, Jacob, God will respect your choice. And I'm like, you mean we don't have this angry God upstairs just waiting to slap me down? Now my religious views have evolved since that point, but to think that whatever I chose, it'll be respected by the God I thought that existed, that was the turning point.
That's a huge perspective shift that she offered you, or that counselor offered you at that point, to have somebody just say that you, to affirm that you had been given, that you had put as much thought into it as you could, and you come to your own conclusion, and that you will be respected for that. That's such a huge and kind and gracious approach from that person.
Yeah. My former father-in-law, credited this counselor, a man, with ruining his daughter and my marriage. And sadly, that counselor, less than a year after he gave me that advice, was involved in a car accident and died. And the former father-in-law gave God credit for killing him, for breaking up our marriage. And I called him up and I said, shouldn't have God killed me? Because I'm the one who ended the marriage, not this counselor. But that was the religious mindset that I was trying to escape, was that. So now I'm divorced. And I realized, in retrospect, that law school and the law practice had been my mistress. Well, I didn't need the mistress anymore. But now I had to have it because it was the only way I was going to be able to afford my freedom. So I figured out a way to have a practice that I loved 70% of what I did. But the truth was, I really was never that passionate about the practice of law. What I ended up loving was the fact that I created a business at the end with 18 employees and we're feeding families and sending kids to college and they're buying houses and going on vacation. That's, I hate to call that masculine because women do the same thing, but that made me feel secure and strong and manly that I built a
Hmm.
business out of all of that turmoil. It was turmoil that led me to law school. It was turmoil that led me to have to succeed at that, you know. And then, the payoff has been that it succeeded well enough that I could finally leave it, a year ago at the age of 57. So now, what do I do with the rest of my life?
Oh, so there's these themes that I'm hearing in all of this that I want to kind of highlight for those that are listening is it seems like your family really instilled and you really owned it yourself, this value around excellence. This you will build something, you will create something, you will lead. And that's how you cope with life's adversities or the fear that your needs might not get met is not to go into the victim place, but to really lean into excellence and develop yourself and develop your craft and the thing that you bring into the world. Does that feel fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So you seem to have this natural ease with this excellence that was instilled to you by your family, but then also this ease with flexibility with just creating by saying yes to opportunities and yes in relationships and seeing what happens. What's that like to be able to combine both of those skill sets or those value systems?
Well, to say that my family instilled excellence in me, I mean, that sounds nice and buttoned up and like there was this plan and textbook they were reading from. You know, it wasn't, it was much sloppier than that.
Uh-huh.
It was just, my dad was a perfectionist at his craft, and I just learned that you do a job right, you finish things that you start. He was a great example. My mother was a great example of that, and countless other people. I've just always been interested in connecting with people. So I think that opened me up to meeting all different kinds of people and just learning from them, experience from them. And sometimes it's the bad example that was more helpful than the good example. Back to the step monster, my life wouldn't be nearly as good had I not learned how to be 3 steps ahead and think quickly on my feet and say what I mean in the moment instead of 5 days later going, damn, I should have said that to her.
Hmm.
I've been able to articulate on a dime, and that's a good skill to have as an attorney.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think as I reflect on what you're saying, like I can watch in moments in myself where I want to avoid adversity. I want to avoid the challenges of life or the bad examples. And yet sometimes they're actually the best teachers. And so maybe it's not always just about searching for the nice excellence piece, the buttoned up part of things, but to let it be a little bit messy so that you can learn something new.
Yeah. I mean, it's cliche, but the oyster wouldn't create the pearl without the grain of adversity of the
Hmm.
sand irritating it.
Hmm.
Um, so I try to make pearls instead of die from the sand.
Yeah, and I think that sounds like I think we could both agree like that's a really amazing philosophy to have in life. And yet, when you're in the middle of the shit, in the middle of the adversity, it's really hard to tap into that. I might just tell you to go screw yourself if you said that to me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I hated it. I
Uh-huh.
hated the step monster. I hated,
Yeah.
being married and struggling with what I wanted and what I felt like I had to do. And, the religious piece was such a profound weight around my neck. I didn't like it, but in retrospect, it served me. I mean, I got here, I'm on your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, life does have a way of getting us there, and it is through the twists and turns that we get to certain places and we start to see purpose, or we get to see the fruits of the labor that we put into it. We get to connect, see the pearl that has been created from that adversity. Um, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that time where you were married and going through the Exodus program, trying to not be a practicing homosexual. Um, and what did holding that part of yourself back, what did that do to your relationships with your family, like with your ex-wife, with your son? Like, what did that do to your relationships?
Well, before she and I even dated, I was upfront that I struggled
Mm,
with the gay thing. And she was so admiring that I was transparent she's like, well, we can beat this together, no pun intended, and quickly transitioned to sharing something that had happened in her life that we spent 7 years in counseling for her to try to get over. So it was just like, I thought I was going to get out of having to date her by
Mm,
telling her I was dealing with the gay thing. Instead, she glommed on me even more. Now she's going through this emotional crisis. So now I have to caretake, you
mm,
know. And I tried to get out of the wedding 3 different times. And ultimately, I was adopted. I wanted to see somebody that looked like me at 22. So having a child was a big deal. I mean, it's kind of a silly reason to want to have children. And she was smart. She had said, we should wait 5 years to have kids. We're getting married at 22. We should wait. And that would have been the wise thing to do. But 3 weeks before the wedding, when I was wavering, she's like, well, I've decided we can have kids right away. So I lost all my objections. So I went
mm.
through with it. And what happened, I got married and I lost all my connections with my male friends that had helped keep the struggle at bay. And, I never acted on my homosexual identity, you know, ever, even before marriage or anything like that. A couple of minor experiences involving kissing another man, but no sex per se. So it wasn't as though I was cheating on her. It was, man, I'm in this marriage. I'm terribly unhappy because I want to be something, I want to be who I am, but I felt like I couldn't. So I was very serious in my 20s. I was, you know, I gained weight. I wouldn't say depressed because I just don't have that kind of a personality, but I was just terribly unhappy. And uh, what it caused me to do is to try to connect with friends again, because that's where I had felt solace in my college years, where as long as I had some good male friends, the struggle wasn't quite as bad, you know.
Mm.
And so a year into the marriage, we have a child. The struggle is worse than ever, and I find out about Exodus, this international umbrella organization of little ministries around the country, around the world, where guys are trying to live consistent with their understanding of theology, scripture, that, you know, living your gay identity is sinful. And so, I read all the books, I met all the cute guys at the conferences, there's lots of hugging, sharing, and that did fill a need, I mean, but then I realized, like I said earlier, at that 98 conference, all I was doing is getting as close to the fire without getting burned. And when I realized that, I'm like, I just got to be honest with myself.
Yeah, I was going to say that it sounds pretty risky for a kind of a pray the gay away or try not to be gay organization to hold conferences and put men in hotel rooms together.
I
I was
know.
thinking
What are you
that feels
thinking?
like trying to touch the fire there a little bit.
Well, that gentleman wanted to touch the fire that night, and all transparency, had he been cuter, I would have let him get in my bed. But he was way older than me and curly black hair that I didn't like. So
Well, I would imagine that sort of stuff plays out a lot when you gather with other people who are trying to repress the same thing or suppress the same thing, that
yeah,
it's going to come out in weird ways at
yeah.
different points, and people are going to seek the thing that they're trying to push away. So it makes sense to me that it probably happened quite a bit in that organization.
And I'm sure there was lots of shenanigans going on, but I've always been extremely self-disciplined. So there was
Mm,
no way I was going to break the rules, at that
mm-hmm,
conference.
mm,
But
yeah. So, what journey have you been on as a person that has freed you from what your religious beliefs were telling you at the time you needed to be versus who you are now? Like, what have you transformed within yourself?
well, I trust myself and my instincts a whole lot more than I did because it turned out I was really right all along.
Mm,
When I was fighting it all those years, deep down, I just didn't understand why it was wrong. I know why it's wrong to kill somebody or steal or be jealous or eat too much food in the terms of gluttony or whatever. But I just never understood what's wrong with two guys that love each other and want to express that love through touch and sex. What's wrong with that? I never could come up with a reason for it other than, well, we wouldn't procreate, but we have overpopulation now. Maybe that was
Mm.
important, when the Bible was written, but I just couldn't see why it was a big deal. And so, when I came out, I really, I had been right all along, you know.
Mm.
Kind of a weird metaphor of that. I don't know if this is a left turn, but the movie The Wizard of Oz, when the
Hmm.
Wicked Witch of the West gets the water thrown on her and she melts to the ground. Well, in the movie, it's the bad lady getting what she deserved. But as a 5-year-old, I cried when I saw that. I felt bad for her. And I
Mm.
grew up in this track of fighting the gay thing, thinking, and here I was rooting for the bad lady. And then all those years later, I go see Wicked for the first time. And guess what? She really wasn't bad. She was just
Hmm.
different. And they labeled her as evil because they couldn't explain her. And that just validated me because I've always been the different one. I went, had my own path. I wasn't on you know, uh, the path, the trail that was beaten down and wide and everybody was on it. I was kind of off on my own. So that was a huge validation, when I saw that on stage. Um, it's not easy either, but fortunately I have an ability to find the funny in most things. And so I've tried to rely on that to just not take it all so seriously and try to take things as they come and, you know, find those relationships where there's reciprocity. And if there's not, you just accept what you have. And if it's not much, you can move on.
Mm.
You don't want to force something that's not there. And I've had to learn that lesson.
Mm. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I think there's something I want us to, we've been having kind of heavier conversations that are about kind of the challenges of your life, but there's also this other aspect of you, the humor that you alluded to, that's really an important aspect of who you are and where you're headed as a person. And so I want to kind of bring some of that out as view as well
Sure.
and see what, who are you today? Like, who are you as this person that has built things through excellence, who has overcome his own pushing away of his sexuality, who was in a marriage to a woman, then was in a marriage to a man, and is now finding himself single. Like, who are you today and where are you going?
Well, it's a hard question, I think, to answer, but what I loved about my job, besides building the business itself, is that the way I was able to help my clients perceive what they needed to do and take the action fairly quickly to address those issues is I used humor for 30 years with my clients to disarm them from the notion that going to the lawyer is scary, that a lawyer actually can be your friend and a support and somebody that you can connect to so that they trust you to take the advice that you give them. And for me, I used humor to do that. Not everybody can do it. If you're not like my law partner, he's just not funny. So, he's got a lot of other talents, but when he tries to use a joke, it just falls flat.
Hmm.
And so just this impromptu sense of humor that I kind of work with every day of my life, that's what I love to do. And so
Mm.
now it's, well, what are the best venues for me to get to simply be myself, tell stories, hopefully have a meaning to the listener, but at least I'm having fun because I love to make people laugh, and I love to share stories of my own life where it seemingly is horribly embarrassing or whatever. And, maybe that helps somebody not take themselves so serious.
Mm.
I mean, the first time I finally broke down and went to a gay bar, I was in Chicago for a conference and I was married at the time. And I'm just like, I've got to go to a gay bar. I didn't know when you go to a gay bar. So the conference ended on Monday night at 5. I was seated at the bar at 6 p.m. at Sidetrack in Chicago, waiting for men to greet me and give me a gift basket and show me the ropes and teach me about gay sex. And maybe there would be some guys today. I sat there for 4 hours the first night drinking water because I couldn't commit two sins. You know, I'm already in the gay bar. So I drank water for 4 hours, scared to death. Nobody talked to me. This went on for 4 nights until finally on Thursday night, which is kind of when you go to a gay bar at 10 o'clock on a Thursday, finally somebody, spoke to me.
That's so funny. I definitely have my own recollections of my first time in a gay bar, and I had high expectations also that it was all going to be done for me, and that I just didn't have to, like, I
Yeah.
could just show up and then I would figure it all out. And it was also incredibly isolating to be there the first time. And I'm glad I had like a couple of straight girlfriends that I had brought with me, but I felt very isolated and like, oh my God, what do I do in this
Yeah.
space?
I just assumed they were there waiting for us, Travis, and just delighted we'd made it. And, here's show you the ropes and go from there. Yeah.
I mean, I guess they should really have that service at gay bars for the every person's first time at a gay bar. There should be some sort of concierge service that just connects you to
Yes.
all of it.
Maybe that's my calling. I do look for the guy by himself in the bar often and,
Uh,
just say something to him
mhm,
just in case they're just waiting for somebody to talk to them. Sometimes they just want to be
mhm,
quiet, but I
mhm,
try to be that guy and
mm,
talk to him because I know how it felt,
mhm.
going and
Yeah,
feeling
I've
like that.
definitely sat at a gay bar at the bar by myself, not talking to anybody, hoping that somebody would break the seal for me and
Yeah,
not
yeah,
me have to be the brave one in that
yeah.
moment.
So few people are initiators in life. I really consider myself more of an introvert, but I have learned extroverted skills and
Hmm.
strategies to get what I want. Because back to how we started the program, what I care most about is connecting with people. That's my
Hmm.
favorite thing to do.
Hmm.
So I'm always looking for connection.
And that's so different than a lot of men out there in the world. Most men are looking to accomplish something or to achieve something, and yet because that's how we're raised to find our value and success as men. But there's that the desire to connect is so the opposite of what we're often taught as men to do.
Well, we're taught that that's feminine
Hmm.
and sharing your feelings and being emotionally intelligent and, like what I'm going through with the divorce, it would have been easy to each get on our own side and fight. But you know what we both were able to do is see it from the other guy's perspective
Mm,
and, respect what we had for 10 years instead of
mm,
it having to end in a horrible battle where we never spoke again. There's a reasonable chance that we will remain friends. And
mm,
to me, that is a testament to both of us.
hmm.
And yeah, it's emotional for me.
I'm so glad you're sharing it because I think it's such a lost art in our current world. Everything is so divisive, and you're in your own corners, and political beliefs or racial things. Like everything becomes so brittle and so easily breakable. And to be able to be in a hard moment with someone where you are separating, where you are transitioning and recreating the relationship, and there may be like strong disagreements or hurt that's involved in that, but to still choose to see each other's humanity, to choose to stretch your own ability to see from their perspective. It's such a lost art that we are not practicing as
Yeah.
people very often these days.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy. I mean, we had some dark times where it could have gone the other way, but at the end of the day, our respective characters won out. And
Hmm.
we behaved like the men we want to be. Are we always
Mm.
consistent? No. But in the end,
Welcome to being a human.
yeah, well, human
Yeah.
101. Exactly.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
So,
totally. So there's something that I hear in that I personally connect to when you're talking about humor as a way that you've kind of navigated the challenges of your life. Earlier, you mentioned that you noticed while you were living with your dad and your stepmom that you could see your own humor getting kind of biting and edgy and critical.
yeah,
So it seems really easy, and I know I've seen this in my own life, but I see it in plenty of other gay men that are out there where we develop a sense of humor that can be sharp and biting and can be quick. And that is a strength that we've developed over time, but it's also a coping strategy. It's also
yeah.
a
And
defense
it's a mask.
mechanism.
It's a mask.
Yeah.
Humor can either be a mask or it can be freeing. And I know the difference. I know what, I mean, I'm not perfect at it today. I mean, sometimes I hide behind humor because I'm uncomfortable,
Uh-huh.
but I had, I saw that happening to me as a teenager with the stepmother. And so that's where I became more self-deprecating. You know,
Uh-huh.
it's, it's better if you just make fun of yourself instead of other people, you
Uh-huh.
know. And they love that. Clients love that, especially because you think the lawyer thinks that he can do no wrong. Well, if you kind of play up the fact that you're human and you make mistakes and laugh about it, they like that.
Uh-huh.
They
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
super disarming. I use that in my coaching work too, because I think it's so easy for my clients to put me on a pedestal, assume I have all the answers, assume that I've got my life figured out. And I like
Right.
to sort of give a peek behind the curtain every once in a while to be like, I'm human too. I'm totally flawed and fallible and struggle at different points. And
Sure.
I utilize humor for that. How do you, for yourself, differentiate what is humor as a defense mechanism versus humor that is freeing? How do you know when you're coming from which side?
Uh, Probably when I'm feeling insecure or anxious and I'm using it to get to the next step. And sometimes that's not bad, you know, but I rarely cut other people down anymore with the humor. Maybe with your friends that you're really close with, you can have a
Right.
sense of humor where, it's off the rails, but that's kind of a stress relief thing. But just in everyday repartee with people, I just don't want to make fun of people. You just
Mm,
don't know where they're at and what button you could push that sends them over the edge. So,
mm-hmm,
that's not a great answer to that question, but it's kind of like I know it when I do it.
mm-hmm,
If I'm using it the wrong way, you probably wouldn't even notice it, but I notice it.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it requires paying attention internally to how it feels as it's coming out.
yeah,
And not and
self-awareness, another
yeah,
feminine attribute that we're taught
uh-huh,
isn't manly.
uh-huh. So true. Yeah, I think it's really important for many of us to unpack that coping strategy that we've developed of humor, to see where is it coming from a place of defense and blocking the world out, or where is it coming from places of inviting people in, disarming people, creating common humanity, lightness,
Yeah,
shifting the energy. Like they're very different skill sets. And as you said, like sometimes you do need to just get through a moment and you utilize it in that moment. Coping strategies are there for a reason.
right.
But I do think that there is gold in really differentiating where am I coming from with my humor, because I also saw myself, especially in my 20s, before I had really come out, where my humor was starting to get really edgy and it was starting to get real critical. And it was, I got a lot of laughs from it, but it was also didn't feel right in my soul to continue bringing a level of critique to people that was really just me projecting my own internal like
Right.
critiquing and self-judgment.
And I have a belief that what you sow is what you reap. So if you become
Mhm.
critical, you are going to receive critical back,
Mhm.
call it the secret or whatever. But I want to put out there those things that are about embrace and connection and hope and fun, because that's what I want.
Mhm.
The metaphor I've come up for the best use of my humor is, imagine a home with a big wraparound porch. I'm thinking of my grandparents' house when I think of this. And, the front porch is where people gather, where it's light, it's fun, it's playful. Well, my humor is the front porch of my soul. And that's where most people like to hang out, quite frankly, either because I don't want them to come inside or they're just not interested in coming inside. But it's just the entry point to my life. You know,
Mm.
there's a whole home inside that I want some people to get to explore and experience. And, that's the tender side, the emotional side, the side that doesn't have it all figured out. And it's like, well, I'm still a consultant to the law firm for 4 more years. So I don't need the paycheck, but I do want to create something in, you know, the last 43 years of my life because I'm going to live to 100. I guess that's 42 now. Anyway, I want to create something that is even more aligned with my passion, which is connection and humor. And,
Mm.
I've already explored. I'm not a stand-up comedian, although I did do it on a cruise ship back in October with a very friendly audience, and it was great fun. But that's really not my scene. I see myself more aligning with a group or a person that has a message they're wanting to share, and I can have my piece of that. And when I share my piece, it's funny. Or maybe I'm interviewing people to highlight, you know, what they're doing and their worth. And as we go through that interview process, I get to be funny, you know.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know, but I'm saying yes to opportunities, and they've been varied and different. This past weekend, a guy that I'd met at a conference in December had his 60th birthday party here in Palm Springs. 25 of his closest friends from around the country flew in. They took over a gay guest house for 4 days. And my friend had planned all these activities. Well, he asked me to be the MC for the weekend. It's not a traditional comedy gig, and MCing, usually you think it's on a TV show or something like this. But basically, I was there to, help facilitate everybody being there to celebrate this guy's 60th birthday. And I had loads of fun. I got to be and do exactly who I was. Now, I didn't get a dime for it, but it didn't matter.
Hmm.
So I was getting to live exactly who I was over this past weekend. And it was wonderful.
Oh, I love that story. And I love that so much of this phase of your life is really about how do I be as authentic as possible? And you can try out things like stand-up comedy and you're like, it's close, but it's not exactly that. And then you can try out this emceeing a birthday celebration and you're like, ooh, there's something there. Like
Yeah.
I just love that you, as somebody that spent a lot of time trying to avoid parts of your identity at a younger age, now gets this time of his life to be like, I'm gonna just be fully expressed and fully authentic in everything that I do.
I call it trying to be radically transparent.
Mm,
Just reveal yourself, Jacob. Just
mm,
reveal yourself.
mm.
So I try to do that.
Which is such a radical act as a one gay boy to another gay boy. Like part of our life has been so much we learned to put that mask on really quickly.
We did. And we stayed 3 steps ahead of everybody, not getting to fully embrace the moment because we were worried about 3 steps down the line.
Yeah. And I can see even in my life still, even though I'm out and I'm not trying to hide that part of my life, I can still see where that mask goes up really quickly in moments when I feel vulnerable or scared, and how I avoid showing people who I really am and what I'm really feeling. And I can like it's just I value that you are in this place in your life where you get to give yourself permission to try to just reveal yourself. Try to show up as much as possible. Try
Yeah.
to be there as fully expressed as
And
possible.
don't judge it. I'm so quick to judge myself where I never judge
Same.
others, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm my own worst critic. In the
Mm-hmm.
law practice, I was like, man, we're just not doing this right, or we need to do this better. And then you see somebody else's work product and you're like, oh my goodness, well, we are doing something right. you know
Mm-hmm.
it's nice when you do give yourself a break to kind of turn around and look about how far you've come, because if you're always looking at the horizon, you're always thinking, well, I've got more to do, I've got more to go, I'm not there. But you know look where we've come from, Travis. you know
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you're now in this phase of using the skill that you've developed over time to reinvent yourself several different times throughout your life. And now you're in a reinvention phase again. But it seems like it also feels to you like it's important to be a part of the reinvention with other people too, with whatever you're creating in the world.
oh
Does
yeah, I
that
don't
feel
want to
true to
do it
say?
alone. I don't want to do it by
Yeah.
myself. That's no fun.
When we first talked, you used this language of being the conduit of life enhancing change. Does that still feel like something that feels in resonance to you as something that
Yeah.
you're trying to bring into the world?
Yeah, and the key word is conduit. I'm not the change.
Right.
I'm not the relief or the epiphany or the thing that makes your life better. I might be the vessel that you can receive it from.
Hmm.
That's all I want to be, is connect, you know, the answer to the questioner or
Hmm.
whatever it is.
Yeah, it makes me think back to that counselor that you had that gave you permission to see all the work that you had done to reflect on who you are, and whatever choice you were going to make, you were going to be respected for that. that's that conduit for life enhancing change. That was a moment where the right thing came through the right person and freed you to see things in a new perspective.
Yeah, a huge, huge moment, and
Yeah.
he probably never realized how big of a deal
Hmm.
that was, you know. I wish I could have told him before he passed.
He's such a great example of that conduit piece that you're talking about, because you still had all the hard work to do to free yourself from that, but he was the conduit of that message in that moment that allowed you, that pivoted you and started you on a completely different part of your journey from there
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
That's beautiful. So, what else would you like to say about this comedy entrepreneur thing that you're exploring as you in this part of your life?
Well, I mean, it is an exploration. And
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing is just putting it out there. And thank goodness for our friend TJ that introduced
Mm,
us to each other. I mean, this is an opportunity for just for me to talk about it. Somebody may be listening and want to talk to me about it or have a question or whatever. And, I do have a website, jacobclancy.com, where you can send me a note and start a conversation, and who knows what will happen. I do
mm-hmm.
not have a blueprint, but I also have past experience as my guide. I just know it's going to work out. Something's going
Mm,
to happen, and it's going to fulfill this purpose, this drive, this desire. And I'm going to get to do and be exactly what I want to be and do and enjoy it.
mm.
I just believe it.
That that piece of faith is so hard for most of us at times when we're stepping into the unknown, when we're not, when we're in that transition phase. Like, is this going to work out? Am I going to fall on my face? Am I gonna? Is this like what's going to happen? And it sounds like your belief in yourself through past experiences helps you know that this is all going to be fine.
Yeah. And I can fall on my face and it's not the end,
Uh huh.
because I know I have the power to pick myself up and keep
Uh huh.
going. I had
Yeah.
a comedy performance in Tulsa that was horrible in February. I wasn't prepared for who my audience was. I show up, it's not a stage, it's a runway that I'm supposed to walk up and down and work both sides of the crowd, and I didn't get to go to the rehearsal, so it just, it was okay. But, I fell on my face, in my opinion,
Mm. Mm.
but let's keep going. Let's keep
Mm-hmm.
going, you
Yeah,
know.
it's so easy to take score right when the thing isn't quite working and to be like, oh, it's a failure. And yet, if you just take another couple steps, you'll find something new
Yeah,
to try it out on.
yeah, yeah.
Are there any specific groups of people that you are interested in bringing your work to, or any communities that you'd like to be in front of as
Well,
you do this work?
Travis, I really have a heart for gay men 50 plus.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to help all of us believe that the last third of our life can and should be the best third. There's such a
Mm,
focus on looks and personality, that when you're going to have health issues potentially, and there is a sense of decline, but it doesn't have to be horrible. And I would
mm-hmm.
like to be part of building a community that supports that notion. Because, what we really love are our friends and our chosen family. And if we have that in abundance, then we'll be able to handle the negative stuff with a better attitude. So I
Mm-hmm.
care about that group a lot. I also care about young gay men and lesbian people who are just coming up, needing to hear from their elders. Not that we're going to preach to them, but I would have liked to have heard from my gay elders, but unfortunately so many of them passed because of
Yeah.
the AIDS crisis. So I care about that, but
Mm-hmm.
also I have a real strong connection with middle-aged women. I've always had great friends,
Same.
and I speak their language. I understand
Yeah.
them, and I know that I can be a conduit to them.
Mm,
So,
mm.
basically anybody who wants to listen to me. There's my audience. And
Oh,
someday
I
pay
love
a
that.
high ticket price. I'm
Uh-huh.
kidding. Not
Well, I
really.
love that you are focused on sort of the 50 and up gay men, because our community does have a challenge with aging. We devalue men that have aged. We are missing a lot of the previous generation because of the AIDS crisis. there is so much like resistance to aging in our community, and yet it's the thing that happens to all of
Yeah.
us, especially if we're lucky, if we make
Yeah.
it to our
If
older
we can make
age.
it, yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh. And so I just love that you have this passion for creating value there, because there aren't enough conversations about where that value is. And some guys find it and some are able to create that, but to have somebody helping be a conduit for the value
Yeah.
that's in that part of a life, I love that you're bringing that into
Thank
this
you.
world.
You know, another group that I really value because it means so much to me personally, I have a handful of really close straight men friends, you know,
Mm.
and if any of them ever come out as gay, I've told them I'm going to kill them because what I've loved is that they have loved me and embraced me and been interested in me as a straight man.
Mm.
And I love those guys and I care about more of those people. I mean, they have a level of maturity and emotional wholeness, if you will, that allows them to connect with a gay guy. And they know that doesn't mean I'm going to hit on them or that I
Hmm.
think they're hitting on me. So I
Yeah.
really value those, you know.
Me too. There's been a thing I've been finding in my life these days is I'm almost trying to collect as many of those like positive straight men in my life where I get to be fully expressed as a person and I don't have to feel like I have to hold something back from them, and
Right.
there's safety for both of us.
And they can be
Like,
just as radically open too. I want to hear your
yeah,
truth. And oh wow, I never struggled with that, or that's interesting,
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, when they show curiosity, when they are willing to be vulnerable back, like that's like my new favorite thing is to collect all those kinds of men, because it's healing for my own journey as a gay boy that felt really
Absolutely.
afraid to be myself. And I also think that we as gay men in relationships with straight men can continue inviting and creating safety for men to be more whole and not need to just be rigid into their masculinity, but to be vulnerable, to experience intimacy non-sexual between men, to get support from other people. I think that there's just such a cool mutually healing thing that can happen in
Yeah.
a relationship
Let's
between
make
gay and
that
straight men.
masculine, you know, let's
Yeah,
call that masculine, you know.
so true.
And I'll give a shout out to my friend Jeff in Nixa, Missouri, because he's one of those guys I'm thinking about. And hopefully he'll listen to the podcast and appreciate that I mentioned him.
Shout out to Jeff. Come on.
Jeff in Nixa.
Thanks for being one of those men, Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, I've had such a wonderful time talking with you, and I'd love to see if there's something that you would like to leave the listener with as a last piece of advice or an offering.
You know, the thing that just jumped in my head, Travis, is, you know, I grew up with a self-imposed sense of religion.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of good parts of that. And I have tried not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I kind of have. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that, you know, we were always told is that all things work together for good. And that's what I really believe. So be it a step monster or being number 11 in your law school class or being funny or whatever, all of those things, if you believe it, I think can work together for your good and make you have the best chance possible to live the best version of yourself that you can. You know, still your choice, but you know, uh, try to look at everything as something that's building, not just the good things.
Such a radically optimistic approach that I need that reminder sometimes in my life.
Yeah,
So
it's a
thanks for
discipline.
bringing
And
that.
and you know, my soon to
Yeah.
be former partner was a wonderful example of always being optimistic. And I wasn't always that way. I learned some of that,
Mm,
you know, from him. But
mm,
you know, even the divorce is a thing that is working to make all things good, you know.
beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
If people wanted to find out more about you, you mentioned your website before, but I'll give you another chance to share your website, any social media. How might people find you out there in the world?
The website is jacobclancy.com, and Clancy is spelled Clancy. Jacob is Jocob. Um, my Facebook is Jacob Clancy Parks. You introduced me as Jacob Clancy. Clancy's my middle name. My
Oh,
last name is Parks. You know, so those would be two ways. I prefer through the website. You can send me a little email and I can respond and we can go from there.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much for bringing your humor, bringing your story, the ups, the downs of it all, so that
Yeah.
we can really connect with you, but also connect with a man that's in a reinvention. I think that's so important to be able to hear those stories, because
Yeah.
So often we only see once it's all tied up and nice and neatly with a bow on it, but to be in a place where
Right.
someone says, here's what I'm figuring out, and I don't know all of it yet is really powerful. Thanks for sharing your story. If people want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Travers03. If you have any questions or thoughts that come up after listening to this episode, please reach out to me there. And if you're enjoying the mission of this podcast and want to be a supporter, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thanks again, Jacob, for joining me. And until our next episode.